Have you ever wondered why we work so hard, often stuck in a rut, day in and day out, chasing that elusive break? The kind of break we hope will finally deliver us from the hamster wheel, letting us breathe, letting us live the life we quietly daydream about. I used to look at my keyboard every morning, thinking, is this it? Is this all I'm ever going to do? Type away for 8 or more hours, maybe take 2 weeks off a year, retire at 65 if I'm lucky, and finally start living? That feeling, that itch, kept me awake at night, even though I was dead tired from work. It was like a slow boil, building inside me, and I just knew there had to be a different path. But could I actually create the life I wanted without waiting for some distant retirement? That sounded as unimaginable as teleportation. Yet I remember reading about mini retirements, setting up automated income streams, focusing on only the tasks that genuinely mattered, and I felt a bolt of electricity course through my spine. It was the realization that the rules of the game we'd been taught, commute, grind, repeat, aren't the only rules out there. Have you felt that spark? That moment where you realize you've been playing someone else's game all along? Let me take you on a journey, because you and I are about to step off the beaten path and dive into the lessons of the 4-hour work week. Let's rip open the lid on how to design our own lives rather than let them be designed for us. I want you to imagine being on a roller coaster. Right now, the cars are clicking their way to the top. You hear the metal clank. Feel the tension in your gut. Because the moment you discover that life is not about working until you drop, everything changes. You start to see illusions for what they are, and you realize that you don't have to trade your time for money until you're too old or burned out to enjoy it. You and I are heading for that very crest, and once we tip over, there's no going back. Let me bring you into my story. A while ago, I was sitting in a cramped cubicle, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, my email blowing up with unread messages. The phone was ringing, again, and the clock read 9:13 a.m. on a Monday. I was barely awake, my coffee had gone cold, and somehow I felt I'd already used up my entire reservoir of energy for the week. Sound familiar at all? It was like being chained. No matter how fast I worked, there was more to do. Even when I finished my tasks, I got roped into other people's chaos. I began to see how easy it was to slip into a cycle where I could literally blink and discover the better part of my life had evaporated into deadlines, stress, and frustration. That's when I stumbled on the idea of designing my life rather than settling for the leftovers. First things first, define your dream. I realized I never truly asked myself, what does the ideal life even look like? But once I did, it was like stepping into a new world. Right now, think about your dream. Close your eyes for 2 seconds and imagine what you'd do if you had all the time in the world. Would you travel across Asia? Learn Italian cooking from a real Italian grandmother in Tuscany? Write a novel? In the 4-hour work week, Tim Ferriss calls this dreamlining. You shift your perspective from, I should save everything I can until I retire, to, how can I live a life filled with meaning and adventure right now? Have you done that? Have you had that conversation with yourself? It's more powerful than you'd expect. By the time I realized my job was swallowing me whole, I also discovered a trick. You don't need to hustle 24/7 to succeed. In fact, Ferriss suggests focusing on effectiveness, not just efficiency. Maybe you've heard that distinction before. Efficiency is doing tasks quickly. Effectiveness is doing the right tasks in the first place. So, There I was, making color-coded lists, streamlining the heck out of everything, proud to be efficient. But I was missing the real point. If you keep perfecting tasks that don't really matter, you're just spinning your wheels. That's where the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle, comes in. This is like a game changer. Have you tried it? You list out all your tasks and see which ones produce the majority of your results. Usually, a tiny fraction of what you do drives a massive chunk of your success. Once I identified those golden tasks, I realized I could all but ignore the rest. That's an adrenaline rush, seeing just how much time you can free up by focusing on the things that move the needle most. Feels good, doesn't it? Shedding all that wasted motion? But let me ask you something. Have you ever sat down and timed how long certain tasks actually take when you give yourself a strict deadline? If you haven't, I dare you to do it this week. Parkinson's law says work expands to fill the time you give it. So if you say you need 3 hours to write a report, chances are it'll take 3 hours or more. But if you limit yourself to an intense 1-hour sprint, it's incredible how that mental pressure can produce just as good, and sometimes better, results. That realization freed me from days of dithering. Suddenly, I felt the adrenaline of rapid focus. You know that feeling when you're up against a real deadline and you turn on the afterburners? Imagine harnessing that all the time, but on your own terms. Yet, even after you master these productivity hacks, there's another massive piece of the puzzle: outsourcing. Let me guess, that word might make you cringe a bit. Maybe you feel only big companies outsource, or that you, personally, can't afford to hire help. I had the same thoughts. But when you delegate tasks to virtual assistants or freelancers, you free yourself to tackle bigger goals, like building your own business or focusing on what truly brings you joy. You start to see how your time is more valuable than the cost of paying someone to do small tasks you dislike. What if you never had to worry about booking your own flights or scheduling your appointments again? Wouldn't that slice of freedom feel like a breath of fresh air? That's the turning point, because once you see how outsourcing lowers your stress and multiplies your time, you start to think bigger. You start wanting to automate the flow of money into your life, which is the ultimate dream: passive income. Doesn't that sound sweet? Or maybe the right term is automated income, which you can set and forget like a well-oiled machine. Ferriss calls it building a muse, a low-maintenance income-generating business that cranks out steady cash flow without you micromanaging it. Some do it with digital products, online courses, e-commerce, subscription services. The magic is, you're not trading time for money hour by hour. You set it up, test the idea cheaply before scaling, and once it's working, you can step back. Now, you're no longer an employee or a frantic business owner. You're a designer of your own life, funded by the systems you created. Picture this. You check your phone, see that you've made a sale while you were sleeping. That money in your bank account literally arrived while you were dreaming. It's an electrifying feeling. But maybe you're wondering, is that realistic? People do it every day, but it isn't always posted front and center because most of us are too wrapped up in old, rigid structures. The first time you get a taste of it, it's both thrilling and unnerving. Because now you're shifting from the belief that you must be glued to a desk to earn a living. Suddenly, you're free to ask, what if I took a mini retirement in Bali? Ferriss loves that idea. You don't postpone living until you're 65. Instead, you take short bursts of retirement, 2 weeks, a month, maybe even 3 months, spread throughout your life, seeing the world, learning to surf, or simply stepping away from routine to recharge your soul? Would you say yes to that? For me, the biggest obstacle was the fear that I couldn't possibly leave my day job behind for weeks at a time. I was an employee, after all. But here's something powerful. You can negotiate remote work or shorter hours by proving you're more productive away from the office. And that's something Ferriss calls liberation. You create concrete data showing you get more done when you're not shackled to the daily distractions at headquarters. If your boss is rational, they might be open to the idea, especially if it costs them nothing or if it even boosts your performance. Sometimes it doesn't work, but often it does, and you're on your way to being location independent. You can close your laptop in the morning and open it up in the evening somewhere else, as long as you deliver results. I remember how nerve-wracking it was to initiate that conversation. But you want to hear the kicker? My manager surprised me by saying yes. Just think, could you see yourself asking for something similar? But even with all those liberating ideas swirling around, I had to come face to face with information overload. For the longest time, I was a news junkie, a social media scroller, a digital hoarder. I thought knowledge was power. But Ferriss points out that too much knowledge, especially random facts that don't help you move forward, is a weight on your shoulders. It's like carrying a backpack full of bricks up a mountain. So I decided to adopt a low-information diet. I wanted to see if focusing only on what I needed to know to push my goals forward would free up mental space. Spoiler alert, it did. It was a shocking improvement. All of a sudden, I wasn't constantly checking headlines or scrolling social feeds to see the latest outrage. I got my time, my mental clarity, back. How would you feel if your head was that quiet? Once I decluttered my mind, I started practicing the act of validating ideas quickly. Rather than spending months or years building something that might flop, I began stress testing ideas with small-scale experiments. Maybe I'd run a quick ad campaign to see if people clicked, or I'd post a pre-order link to see if there was any interest before investing in production. When it worked, I leaned in. If it flopped, no big deal, I moved on. The beauty is that your failures become small bumps in the road, not catastrophic derailments. If you could test every crazy idea you've ever had this way, would you do it? It might lead you to your golden muse. That approach also forces you to build rules for decision-making. Because trust me, once you start exploring all these options, there's a risk of becoming overwhelmed by the sheer number of potential ventures or dreams. So ask yourself, does this idea bring me closer to my overall vision? Am I excited about it? Does it have real potential for profit? If the answers are yes, proceed. If not, kill it quickly. The more you rely on a handful of guiding principles, the less stress you put on yourself agonizing over every little fork in the road. Now, let me tell you about the day I realized it was time to let go of low-value customers. That might sound cutthroat, but if you're freelance or you run your own business, you've likely experienced the emotional toll of dealing with endless demands or rock-bottom budgets that make you question why you're doing this in the first place. The lesson is, fire your problem clients. It's scary at first. You worry about losing income. But if you're focusing on the 20% that brings 80% of the results, you'll see that these high-maintenance or low-paying clients weren't worth the time or stress. Have you ever had to break ties with someone who was draining your energy? If you have, you know the sense of liberation that follows. Still, you might be thinking, great, so maybe I can shift my approach to work. But what about my paycheck? I need to live. That's when the concept of looking at income per hour, not just total income, changed my life. Because if you're making a high annual salary but working 80 hours a week, your freedom is still minuscule. But if you make a bit less annually, yet you only work 10 or 15 hours a week, you may be infinitely wealthier in terms of real life. A friend of mine realized that by moving abroad, geo-arbitrage is what Ferriss calls it, he could literally live better on half the money. Lower cost of living, fewer hours of work, more hours of fun. That's the power of design. Suddenly, the world is your sandbox. Let me ask you something else. What interrupts you the most during your workday? The phone? Random coworkers asking for a quick chat? Slack messages pinging you left and right? Ferriss urges us to eliminate interruptions and set boundaries. That might mean ignoring your inbox for a while, or turning off phone notifications, or letting your colleagues know that from 9 to 11, you're off limits. I started doing that, and it was glorious. My productivity soared, and ironically, so did my free time, because I got work done faster. Do you have the courage to tell people no, or do you keep yourself on high alert, ready to respond instantly, even if it kills your focus? Now, if you're going to make big shifts, mini retirements, remote work, building a muse, cutting distractions, the next question is, how do you negotiate it all? That's where the art of deal-making comes in. You learn to ask for what you want. Too many of us shy away from demanding a better arrangement at work, or better rates from a supplier, or even just better terms for our phone plan. It's not about being pushy. It's about recognizing the value you bring to the table and not being afraid to propose solutions that benefit everyone, including yourself. One day, I mustered the nerve to ask a prospective partner for double the commission rate on a product. My heart was racing. I was sure they'd laugh at me. Guess what? They actually agreed. That changed everything for me, because from then on, I realized how many doors stay locked simply because we never bother trying to open them. Have you ever done something you thought was impossible, only to discover it was surprisingly easy? At this point, I can almost feel the buzz in the air. We're right at the cusp, that moment when the roller coaster is perched at the highest peak, about to plunge into an entirely new dimension of possibility. It's the dimension where you shape your days around what lights you up, not just what pays your bills. The dimension where you can condense your tasks into tight, effective bursts of productivity, freeing up the rest of your time for traveling the world, learning new skills, or simply being present with your loved ones. That is the beating heart of the 4-hour workweek philosophy. And if there's one thing I want to hammer home, it's this. You don't have to be a slave to convention. You can design your life. You can be the architect, not just the occupant. So here's a fun angle. Treat it like a game. Gamify your steps. Every new system you put in place, like outsourcing your grocery shopping or automating your business, becomes a power-up. Each goal, whether it's building that muse or negotiating remote work, is like leveling up. Maybe your next mini-boss is the fear of what your family or friends might say, or the doubt that keeps you from asking for more flexible hours. But with each obstacle you conquer, you earn more freedom points. You see yourself inch closer to that dream you wrote down when you started your dreamlining exercise. The more you treat it like a strategic game, the less you'll be weighed down by old assumptions. Doesn't that idea feel exciting? I dare you to start your next Monday with the mantra, "This is a game, and I'm here to win." And then you realize, once you start winning, the possibilities become endless. Let's say you automate a source of income that meets your basic living expenses. Suddenly, you have a blank canvas for how to spend each day. You're not bound by the need to be in a certain place at a certain time for 40 or 50 weeks a year. You can take that trip to South America, go learn tango in Buenos Aires. You can volunteer in a conservation project in Costa Rica. Or maybe you want to spend more time with your kids. Watch them grow up without feeling torn between them and your job. It's a second wave of advantage, a deeper transformation. It's like stepping into a vibrant new realm where you control the dial on your own destiny. Let's pause for just a second. You feel that energy, right? That tingling sense that maybe, just maybe, everything you thought about work and life can be turned on its head? If you feel even a flicker of that flame, don't ignore it. It's the same spark that led me to push through the fear, to take small but significant steps to free myself from old constraints. And once I started, I realized there was no going back. The world looks different when you understand you can negotiate your boundaries, delegate tasks you hate, eliminate half your to-do list by focusing on the 80-20 rule, and create automated income that funds your adventures. It's a rush like no other. Right now, you and I are at that edge. We've raced through the highs of possibility and teased apart the illusions of busyness. We've glimpsed freedom on the horizon. And I'm going to wrap this up in 5 seconds without repeating a laundry list of everything we just covered. Instead, let's cut to the chase. You can do this. You can transform your routine from a soul-sucking grind into a life of experimentation, adventure, and control. It starts with one step. Maybe that's focusing on your dream, or outsourcing a tiny sliver of your tasks, or finally telling the world enough with meaningless busy work. Now, before we part ways, I have one invitation for you. You've tasted the idea of financial and personal freedom here. How about social freedom? Our next stop is The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. It's a killer follow-up that'll show you how to slip out of the matrix of paycheck-to-paycheck living and dive into social lessons that might just blow your mind. Ready to keep riding the momentum? Go watch it. I promise you, this journey is only getting started. Go ahead, dive deeper. See you in the next adventure.